Okay, welcome everyone to today's Forum 1 webinar, Unlock Your Secret Garden, How to Build a Developer Community Around Your Data. As we were preparing for this webinar, we were thinking about how there are many organizations out there with lots of data, and it's data that they'd like to share, and with that idea of open data catching on with so many of them are wondering how best to go about doing this. So many organizations are in a position where they effectively have a secret garden, a walled garden of data that has a lot of potential, but no one knows about it because it's just not made very accessible. So today's topic is all about how to overcome that challenge, how to extend the reach of your data, and the way to do that, as Eric will explain, is to create and nurture a developer community to actively engage with and to give those developers the support and the tools that they need, such as programmatic APIs, which are essentially the keys to these data gardens, so that they can unlock your secret garden of data and make it accessible to the public. So to get started, I'm going to introduce our presenter today. It's Eric Davis. He is a project director here at Forum 1. Eric has a passion for helping people live healthier lives and for developing strategies that use technology to do so. A little background on Eric. He grew up in Muncie, Indiana. He is a graduate of Ball State University, American University, and University of Maryland. And his interests include health, fitness, and technology. So without further ado, Eric, take it away.
Great, thank you, Ned, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Eric Davis, and I'm excited to speak with you today about building, growing, and marketing an online community geared towards developers. So let's get started. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to explore why we should reach out to developers, define what we mean by developers and a developer community, and spend most of our time talking about communication, talking about recommendations on how best to grow and market a developer community. But before we jump into these recommendations, let's take a step back and define what a developer community is and why reaching out to developers should be part of your larger digital communication strategy. So why reach out to developers? Over the past few months, I've been working with one of our clients to create a strategic plan on how they can go about extending the reach and impact of their messages. My client is a federal government health agency whose job is to educate consumers, researchers, and health professionals about a wide range of health issues. They are in the business of ensuring that their audiences have the latest, most up-to-date information. The challenge they're facing, similar to what other government agencies, nonprofits, and associations are facing, is that they are producing great content and awesome data, but are having a difficult time getting this into the hands of the people who could benefit from it. And this is where developers come in. We knew if we were able to get this content and data into the hands of the developers, great things could happen, such as expanding the reach of their content and data and getting more people accessing their information, opening up their data to foster innovation, building relationships to create new products, and allowing our clients to really focus on what they do best, which is creating great content and data and not worrying about the technology that goes with that. And with the successes we saw with companies and organizations like Twitter, Facebook, the New York Times, and the White House, who created great APIs, opened up their data to developers, and saw new products being introduced to the market, we knew that an opportunity exists in providing developers trusted data and building a community around these resources. So what do we mean when we say we're building a community around our data? It means that we are working with a collection of passionate people with distinctive personalities and skill sets who interact and work together towards a common mission by freely exchanging information, being transparent, and fostering trust. In our case, it is not only developers, but other people such as designers, communication professionals, and writers who are interested in using and contributing to open source and open data projects to foster change around a particular health, environmental, or educational issue. So keep this definition in mind as I talk about developers and a developer community. So how do I go about kind of creating this developer community and marketing it to the right people? Well, that is the question we had, and we spoke to a number of online community experts, community managers, and developers, as well as review the literature out there about online communities' best practices to help us answer this question. And through these interviews and research, we developed a series of recommendations that you can follow to build a successful developer community. These recommendations can be broken out into 4 key areas, and that's giving developers what they need, knowing where to go and how to engage with developers, why you need a community manager, and the importance of celebrating success. We're going to spend the rest of the session discussing these pieces. So our first set of recommendations is focused on giving developers what they need. When a developer accesses your community, whether it's through the developer section of your website or finding your projects on SourceForge or GitHub, you only have one chance to make a great first impression. So how do you do this? Well, first off is you want to make your mission clear. Developers want to see what your mission is, what you hope to accomplish by opening up your data, and they want to check this with their own personal mission to ensure that you guys are in alignment. And that gives them the motivation they need to say, yes, I want to use your data and do some cool things with it. We also want to respect what we call the 10-minute rule. When a developer comes to your site, they should be able to understand what they can do with your APIs in one setting. And that one setting could be 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, it could be half hour, but within that one setting, they should have a clear idea of what they can do with your API. And this means that we want to provide them awesome success stories. Developers want to see what is possible with your APIs. Providing them success stories and case studies will allow them to see who did what with your APIs. It also means that we need to offer them great resources, such as well-presented APIs, up-to-date and clear documentation, API keys, and software developer kits, also known as SDKs. Although we were talking about developer communities, I would also recommend that you check out the numerous sources out there on how to create an API that developers love. And lastly, there should be a way to connect with developers and ask questions. This means providing them online forums and ways for them to connect with your community manager to ask any questions they may have. It also means providing online forums, so if a developer has questions about your API, how it's structured, how it's being used, questions about documentation, they can also post those questions to like an online forum and know that either the community manager or maybe another member in that community is answering your question. Our second recommendation is to integrate developer resources across relevant properties. And that means integrating resources across your developer section, GitHub, and other developer sites. So for instance, if you're a government agency, a nonprofit, an association, or an NGO, you should consider having a section of your site specific for developers. These sections usually go by the name of, let's say, form1.com/developers or cdc.gov/developer or hhs.gov/developers or something similar, and includes those resources I mentioned earlier. That again includes well-presented APIs, case studies, and links to code hosting sites such as GitHub. A great model to follow is the developer section of the Department of Labor's website. When a developer comes here, it's very clear to them that they can really see what they can do with the Department of Labor's data. They can see the different data sets that are available. They can see there's the SDKs that they would need to be able to download to be able to access to understand how they can use the APIs. They can also see sample code. Other examples of the site of great developer sections include the New York Times, where you can see a developer can come in here. They can see what APIs are available. They can quickly find their API keys. You can see there's an online forum where they can connect with other developers to ask questions. There's also that gallery piece that you see in the left navigation, where a developer can come in and actually see how other developers are using the New York Times APIs to create new products. Another example is the World Bank. Looking on the right-hand side, you can see that when a developer comes in here, it's very clear where they can find API documentation. They could see in the application showcase how other developers are using the World Bank APIs. And again, it's those types of tools that you want to be able to provide developers and how they can access your APIs and how they can use them and what's possible, and showing them what's possible. And then lastly, the White House is another example of an agency who's opening up their data, connecting with developers and having those resources in that developer section. And then we also talked a little bit about GitHub and that being another site they can access to find different ways of using APIs. So let's talk a little bit about code hosting sites. What are they and which ones should you use? Code hosting sites are where large amounts of source code are stored. They're used by developers to support version control, bug tracking, release management, mailing lists, and documentation. They go by the name of GitHub, SourceForge, and Google Code. In our discussion with developers and other online community experts, we were told time and time again is that GitHub is where you need to be. GitHub right now has over 4 million developers and millions of repositories of source code associated with their site. And since I work with a lot of federal clients, I'm glad to see that there are about over 350 government projects happening on GitHub right now. So this is, a site where you really want to make sure that your developer section that you created is really linked to these other sites, such as GitHub, so when a developer comes in, they can easily find all the information that they need. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you can really truly integrate these presences with the use of a community manager. And that brings us to a third recommendation, which is to provide great APIs. This means that these APIs are well presented, they have great documentation, they're interesting, and there's exciting success stories related to those showing what's really possible. And this leads us into our next recommendation, and that is providing awesome success stories. Without question, developers want and need success stories. And your job is to really show them what has been done with your APIs. So if we're talking about new apps that use your data, let's share that story. If we have a story about how content syndication helped, like a local health department, better educate their citizens by syndicating CDC content and saving, the local health department time and money by not producing their own content, but at that same token, extending the reach of CDC's content so they're getting more eyeballs to what they've been creating, we need to talk about that. Developers want to hear these stories. They need to hear these stories. And we need to make sure these stories are more visible and show the impact that APIs can have. And that leads us into going to where developers are. And actually so our second set of recommendations is focused on going to where developers are and engaging with them. And notice I said we're going to be engaging with and not marketing to developers. So how do we begin? If there's one thing I want to stress with you all today, it's that you need to actively engage with developers online to build trust, communicate with them, and get them excited about what is possible. Outside of GitHub, one of the best places I found to engage with developers is through dedicated online forums such as the U.S. government's API Google group. As of now, there are over 200 active members discussing government APIs, open data, etc. in this community. And it was through this group that I was able to get great feedback that helped me inform some of the best practices that I'm sharing with you today. With some research, you should be able to find dedicated groups of developers that work in your sector, whether it's nonprofit, association, or NGOs. And if you're not part of these groups, you need to find the right ones, get on them, and start listening to developers and start participating with them. Another site you need to have a presence on is Programmableweb. This is a site that helps developers find, share, and discuss APIs. There are great opportunities for you to listen to developers, see what their needs are, and provide them support if possible. It is also here that one of the editors of Programmableweb has offered to write a story about one of my clients and how they're using APIs in their setting. Talk about a great marketing opportunity. And we would never have found that editor if we weren't actually in this community listening and connecting with developers. And Stack Overflow is another site you need to leverage. Think of Stack Overflow as a big Q&A site with tons of opportunities to listen to developers and their needs and to make them aware of your APIs. And always remember that if you want developers to use your APIs, you don't want to market to them. Instead, you need to become active participants in these online communities to understand who they are, what projects they're working on, what issues they're having, how you can help them maybe solve some of those issues with your APIs, and start forming those connections with them. So not only is it important to have a presence online, but you also need to connect with developers offline. There are a number of local and national events available to really connect with developers. These opportunities include local meetups. Local meetups are a cheap but effective way to connect with developers. Meetup groups that you need to search and find are groups that are focused on open source, APIs, and specific programming languages such as Drupal or Ruby on Rails or Python. In my case, the DC API Meetup group is just one example of a group that I'm participating in, and where it's allowed me to connect with developers to help me work with them to share my clients' resources. Conferences are another great way to connect with developers offline. The conferences that you should consider are also centered on open source and specific programming languages that I mentioned above. And examples of conferences you should look at include conferences such as OSCON, which is the open source conference that happens in Portland every summer, DrupalCon, and Health Datapalooza. And for you, you want to be able to find those conferences that attract developers that would be interested in using your data in your sector. Challenges and hackathons. Both of these types of events are great ways to connect with developers. Not only are developers motivated to participate in these events to win prize money, but they also love to be paid in what they call people, pizza, and beer. And programming classes are another great way to get your APIs out there and connect with developers. As part of our research, we connected with developers who were also part-time instructors teaching that next wave of developers. These teachers/developers were willing to use our APIs for some of their class projects. And what we're starting to learn is that if teachers like our APIs, they're more apt to share our APIs with their colleagues. And likewise, these newly minted developers who would be exposed to our APIs in their classes would start to turn to us to know that they can rely on us to provide them great, high-quality APIs for not only future school projects, but also for projects they may be working on once they graduate from school. And that brings us to our seventh recommendation, which is, to regularly communicate with developers. While we recommend connecting with developers both online and offline, we also recommend ensuring that we have a regular communication strategy in place, that we're always keeping developers informed of our latest happenings. One of the best ways to do this is through email marketing. Think about creating an email subscription list that developers can access and subscribe to from the developer section of your website. You should also look to see how you can leverage social media, primarily blogging and Twitter, to communicate with developers. This actively listening in the social media space to understand what developers are talking about, participating in those conversations, and guest blogging are just other great ways of how you can get more awareness around your APIs. Our eighth recommendation is to nurture power developers as evangelists. Also known as power geeks, these are the people who post to blogs and online forums, who ask questions and help colleagues with their problems. These are the people you need to listen to and to support them. If these power geeks like and trust you, they will tell their friends about you, and you are in a better position of getting developers to use your APIs by really getting these guys in your corner. And that brings us to our third set of recommendations, which is focusing on providing a community manager whose role is to help really grow that developer community. Another item I want to stress and not really stress is, you need to have an active community manager. The days of, if we build it, they will come is non-existent when it comes to developer communities. You need to provide, train, and support a community manager who can connect with developers, answer questions, facilitate and moderate discussions, and forums that could be happening within your section of within that developer section of your website or in the different forums that could be happening on other developer community sites, such as within GitHub or SourceForge. They can also keep your developers informed of new APIs, your case studies, etc. And lastly, and a couple other things that community managers bring to the table is, one, their job is to ensure that community rules are being followed, that bugs are being tracked within your source code, they're being fixed, and the documentation is current. And ultimately, their job is to make sure that that community is happy. So what are the traits needed to be a successful community manager? When we spoke to the different online community experts, developers, other community managers, they essentially said that a community manager needs to have two skill sets: people skills and technical skills. From a people skill perspective, they need to be able to wear multiple hats. They need to be able to kind of wear that technical hat, can answer different technical questions. They need to be kind of a person who can moderate, facilitate conversations. They kind of need to be the enforcer who makes sure rules are being followed. They're the connectors that are trying to connect different developers and different communities together to kind of talk about the same information. So they need to be able to have strong people skills in order to help make that happen. And they also need to have strong technical skills, because ultimately, at the end of the day, community managers are working with technical developers. So they need to be able to answer any questions that developers may have. So when we talked about what's more important, should we hire somebody that has, more technical skills first and then group them on the people skills, or should we have somebody that comes in more or less, with that, engaging personality, that extrovert who really has strong people skills, and then teach on the technical side. And when we spoke to those experts, they said time and time again, hire somebody first that has strong people skills, because you can always train them on the technical skills later on. So keep that in mind. And then our last recommendation centers on celebrating success. The last thing you want to do is to have developers think that you're using them for free work or not acknowledging their contributions. As developers come in and contribute to the community, you want to ensure that their contributions are acknowledged and appreciated. You want to thank them for their efforts, no matter how small, and you want to celebrate community successes, with that larger community. So you want to do this by giving them contributions and essentially giving everyone virtual high fives. That means, writing a tweet or a post about, the great work that this developer is doing. It's maybe including them in your email newsletter that you're going to be sending out to developers. It's kind of doing those types of pieces to really say thank you guys for all your hard work. So in closing, we talked about, why it's important to include developers in your digital communication strategy, and we also defined what a developer community is. We spent most of the time really talking about what it takes to establish and grow that developer community, and that involves giving developers what they need, going to where developers are and connecting with them, seeding the community with a community manager, and then celebrating success. So let's open this up to discussion and address any questions that you may have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric. That was full of lots of useful information. We have a few questions here from the audience, and so I just wanted to ask you those right now. Let's see, what success stories are you seeing happening with federal government in opening up their data right now?
What you're seeing now is the government's really focused on really creating that great content and the great data. And through content syndication, they're able to make it really easy for local and state health departments, for instance, and I'm using that as an example, who can come in. These guys typically don't have a whole lot of time, a whole lot of budget to create content on their own, but they want to be able to inform people in their community about like a health issue, such as, let's say, like there's like a flu epidemic, for instance. And so you're seeing a lot of like those like hospital websites, local and state health departments that we're actually seeing. I think there's maybe about 30 examples that we have so far of these agencies going out, grabbing content, syndicating it on their site, kind of through those APIs, and they're doing it at a lower cost, and at that same token, CDC is getting more eyeballs to their content that they can then kind of include in their performance metrics. So it's kind of like a win-win for both parties.
Great. Okay. And another question here. You mentioned earlier on that you're working with a client, I'm not sure which one now, to create their developer community. Where are you with this, and when do you anticipate having results?
We now have completed like a number of different personas for this client. We are actually in the process of working with them to develop their developer section, including a lot of those resources that we mentioned earlier in regards of making sure that their APIs are kind of well documented and there's something that's well received by developers. We're going out now to the different entities that have been using their content syndication tool to get those success stories, including those on the site. And so right now it's in that process of getting the site up and launched, probably by sometime in May.
Oh, great. And did you mention whether that was a government or nonprofit?
Government agency.
Government agency. Okay, great. All right. Another question here. You had mentioned different meetup groups, and by the way, folks, you will receive all the slides in an email afterwards. So don't worry if you missed anything on the presentation. But we just had a question asking you to repeat some of those different meetups and groups that you recommend people get involved with to find developers and get involved in the community.
In my case, the group that's been very beneficial to my work has the local meetup groups called the DC APIs.
Okay.
And it's essentially where.
And that's a meetup group or a Google?
That is a meetup group.
Okay.
And and what you're seeing is that the people that are involved in this meetup group are also those same people you see that's involved with the Google groups.
Okay.
So it's that way that you can kind of really connect with, find them online, connect with them offline, and then really start to really build those relationships. So it's the DC meetup group has been the DC API meetup group has been great for that. Other groups that we've been looking at, we also have a presence out in San Francisco now, and so we're actually going to a number of different meetups there, focused around Code for America, other meetup groups along those same lines.
Okay, great. And a question about the community managers. You had talked about skills that those community managers had to have, the people versus technical skills, and how it was good to hire somebody with the people skills and teach them the technical skills later. What if, the question here is, what about organizations where maybe you have somebody internally that you think could champion that role? Is that a possibility for someone internally to do that job, or is it really recommended that this is a huge job, you have to hire somebody new or shift somebody out of one role and into the community manager role? Ideally,
you would probably want to be more of a full-time position, or at least a very dedicated resource. Through the research that we've conducted with talking to those online community experts, the recommendation has been you need a full-time community manager, because really they're going to be connecting with a lot of different developers, answering a lot of different questions, wearing a number of different hats. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be based on that organization's budget. What you don't want to do is just say, okay, I have this great data, I just want to push it out there, other people can find it. You're going to need to put some time and effort into getting people to understand what your data is, answering any questions they may have, showing them what's possible with your data, and you need that community manager who can kind of do that. Because not only could your data live on your website that people can access, it can live in those different communities such as GitHub and SourceForge that we talked about earlier. So you're going to really need to have that person that's going into those different communities, connecting with developers, listening to those conversations, seeing where your data kind of fits in. And so if that's something that a person can fit in their job now, great. But if it doesn't, then you need to kind of really think about how you want to staff that. But at the end of the day, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you just put it out there and hope people are going to use it, it's not going to happen. Great point. Great point. All right. And with that, we're going to conclude today's webinar. Thanks, everybody, for being so rapt with attention and for providing questions for us. We appreciate it. And we're looking forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thanks for joining us again. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and a great Thanksgiving. Take care, folks. Thanks.